my honor, pleasure, and delight to introduce Banu Subramaniam, who holds a PhD in zoology and genetics from Duke University and is currently a professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She was previously an associate dean of research in the College of Fine Arts and Humanities there, and also recently concluded a stint as chair of that department. She's the author of Ghost Stories for Darwin, The Science of Variation and the Politics of Diversity from the University of Illinois Press in 2014, and Holy Science, The Biopolitics of Hindu Nationalism from the University of Washington Press in 2019, as well as the co-editor of 3 different volumes, all falling broadly within Feminist STS, including most recently Meat, I have to say it with an exclamation point, it's in the title, a transnational analysis from Duke University Press in 2021. Beyond all of these things, she's also the author of numerous articles and essays and has been visiting faculty at Harvard University, Northeastern University, and the University of California at Irvine. And I say all of that to impress upon you the fact that she is prolific and one of the leading figures in feminist science and technology studies, but also partially just to register my sheer awe. Like, how on earth did you manage to accomplish all of that while chairing your department? Can you please tell me your secrets? I may need them at some point, maybe, we'll see. I say all of this, pardon me, I just said that. Across her many publications, Subramaniam offers a powerful re-narration of the nature culture of contemporary bioscience, one that refuses the tidy parcelings of nature and nurture, science and politics, object and subject, that have long characterized bioscience's story of itself. In Ghost Stories for Darwin, for example, she tracks the seemingly benign and descriptive language of biological variation among individual organisms as it is reworked into the various eugenic political grammars of difference, such as race, gender, species, and sexuality. And as this narration makes clear, biopolitical terms of difference are haunted then by the violent processes that produce knowledge of difference. Thus, by Ghost Stories, she means to invoke the various biopolitical presences, material and immaterial, that texture current debates about diversity, often with the morbid irony that the outcomes of eugenic grammars are also frequently the primary terrain upon which subordinated subjects might contest their very subordination. Similarly, Holy Science explores the seeming paradox of Hindu nationalist biopolitics, that uncanny fusion of Hindu nationalist mythology and contemporary bioscience. This political configuration may be hard to comprehend for those who assume that science is counterposed to tradition, religion, the supernatural, the narrative, and the mythological. For students of contemporary South Asia, the book is both a fascinating and rich analysis of the centrality of science as both discourse and practice to the Modi regime. But even for those who know little about contemporary South Asian politics, Subramaniam invites us to engage with scientific invocations of authority as deeply infused with myth, emotion, desire, fantasy, and attachment. Finally, I would be remiss, as both a scholar of meat and as meat myself, to neglect to mention Meat! Exclamation point. A volume that through careful curation exposes the interwoven cultural and technical processes by which the meat is made. This approach refuses to treat meat as an originary or pre-political biological substance, and following the thread of feminist STS that she has, I think, pioneered, demands not an essentialist account of what meat must be, but how and why meat has become what it is, that process, and what social and political reconfigurations might allow it to become something else. So as someone who writes about both the past and the speculative futures of meat, I find this analytic shift invaluable, enormously helpful for my own work, particularly as its transnational framework unwinds many of the nationalist moral economies that tend to naturalize meat as substance and overdetermine our affective and political relations to it. Across all of these works, Subramaniam's focus is on the process of science, posing resolutely the critical question, What does it mean to do science as a feminist? That's a hard question to pose, much less to answer. And it is made no easier by the current moment and the crisis in which we find ourselves. Because in the midst of the pandemic, the call to trust the science, for all its good, noble, and worthy intentions, has accomplished perhaps less than its proponents had hoped. In no small part because it endeavored to reestablish a boundary between the political and the scientific, a fantasy and a myth in its own right. And I say this not to rehash questions about the correctness of any particular policy or utterance or argument any of us have made, but instead to highlight the vitality, difficulty, and bravery of what she does. Our current circumstances demand a critical narratology of the refracted and diverging meanings of the science it is that we are to trust, one that attends to its ghosts and requires that we sit with them. To me, this is the invitation that Subramaniam's work offers. It is a pressing invitation indeed, so please join me in welcoming her.
Just give me a second to. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's on. Oh, yeah, okay. Is that better? Well, good afternoon, everyone. Gabe, thank you for that very, very generous and very meaty introduction. And I'm really grateful to Jen and Jolie for this invitation. And I think I'll channel Jolie that when I was invited, it was, what did you say? Exhilaration and terror, and sort of both of what I'm feeling right now. And thanks very much to Julie for her superb organization, Jacqueline, Jeremy, and Julian for your support with everything. It's really been a lovely visit so far. $250 million years ago, the world was a single biomass, Pangea. Tectonic forces pulled it apart, plants dispersed. They evolved in their new continents with astonishing adaptations, creating new kith and kin. Then colonialism reknit the seams of Pangea. The world ecosystems collided and mixed in a biological bedlam. How to tell these stories? Miscegenated stories, shattered stories, fragmented stories. Not to repair the broken history into fullness, as Ocean Vuong reminds us, but to build an epistemology and aesthetics that celebrates the fragmentary, partial, and incomplete. In Eli Clare's world, how do we crip wholeness to include that which is collapsed, crushed, or shattered? Across vast timescapes and mobile playscapes, how to tell a story of belonging, unbelonging, and rebelonging. In discussing colonialism, I must acknowledge that I live, I work, and I here speak on unceded land of Native peoples. How to narrate this story of the ongoing colonial regimes of settler societies and their continued presence in the many afterlives in the post-colonies. But first, let us ask, what did colonizers do to the land and its inhabitants? Here, Leanne Simpson astutely summarizes this. Really, what the colonizers have always been trying to figure out is how do you extract natural resources from the land when the peoples whose territory you're on believe that those plant, animal, and minerals have both spirit and therefore agency? And she answers, one, you use gender violence to remove indigenous peoples and their descendants from the land. You remove agency from the plant and animal worlds. And three, you reposition the land as natural resources for the use and betterment of white people. Colonialism is fundamentally a story of violence, a teeming, inventive life on Earth decimated, cleaved into hierarchies of human and non-human, superior and inferior, master and slave, native and alien. A vital, vibrant planet rendered into desolate landscapes of crashed and crushed Earth, depraved plantations, an ecological apocalypse of pillaged lands and peoples through slavery and empire. A feminist retelling of this story insists that there is no abstract Anthropocene, but a sexually and racially stratified anthropos, where some anthropos colonized, conquered, enslaved, and dehumanized other anthropos. Then they returned home with their rich spoils to build fortresses and enact borders and laws to keep and protect their stolen fortunes. No pristine Eden here, no purity, no corner untouched by colonialism and its afterlives and the rapacious tentacles of modernity. Science is integral to this project. Through conceptual landscapes of gender, race, class, caste, indigeneity, sexuality, ability, and binaries of sex, gender, cis, trans, native, alien, black, white, heterosexual, homosexual, disabled, able-bodied, colonizer, colonized, healthy, unhealthy. Science has created biopolitical landscapes of inferior and superior bodies. Like the original colonists, contemporary science, in the name of rectifying the horrors of the past, has recolonized rather than decolonized. Through a politics of nativist purity, fields such as conservation biology, restoration ecology, reproductive biology, museums and gardens, seed and germplasm banks, these savior sciences preserve the legacies of empire. Science has transformed the majestic, deep history of plant time into reductionist linear time of botany. Plant time and its affinities with queer time and crypt time live uncomfortably with temporalities of scientific modernity. It is this transformation of plant worlds into the field of botany that interests me here today. Today, plant worlds are botany. If botany is a powerful site that shows up a normative nature, mobilized as a potent site for the management and recuperation of white Western patriarchy, how do we decolonize botany and our love for plants? I start with the answer. We can never decolonize botany within disciplines and institutions that remain deeply colonial. Instead, decolonization, much like feminism, is an engaged, reflexive practice, an intentional movement towards more just futures. Growing up in India, the plant world was forever enchanted. Woven into mythological and folk tales, plants were lively agents in fantastical tales. Stories abound. The sweet, fragrant jasmine emerging from the churning ocean, the sesame tree emerging when Lord Vishnu's sweat fell on earth, the tamarind tree housing myriad spirits. Plants were essential and ubiquitous as digestives, health aids, beauty remedies, games, and musical instruments. Once in school, a botanical education disenchanted the natural world. I had to learn Latin names by rote, erasing the luxurious and magical context of my childhood. They severed plants from the world I knew and loved. Botany's universal terminology seemed sterile, abstract, absolute, and without context. A study in botany and its Latin nomenclature was a study in alienation from the natural world around me. Jamaica Kincaid describes this powerfully in her novel, Lucy. Like me, Lucy was forced to learn by rote the famous poem Daffodils by William Wordsworth. She intensely resents this. Her response to a field of iridescent daffodils when she first sees it is priceless. I wanted to kill them, she explains. I wish that I had an enormous scythe. I would just walk down the path, dragging it alongside me. I would cut these flowers down at the place where they emerge from the ground. Speaking directly to the politics of naming, Kincaid reflects, this naming of things is so crucial. This naming of things is so crucial to possession, a spiritual padlock with the key thrown irretrievably away, that it is a murder and erasing. This legacy of capturing and renaming nature leaves the post-colonial writer in the position of having to renegotiate the terms of taxonomy, struggling to articulate new relationships and new meanings in the tired language of empire. We need new vocabularies, new languages for any project of decolonizing botany. Despite its colonial scripts, my post-colonial education ill-prepared me for graduate school as a student here at Duke. Nearly all my peers grew up with nature. As children, they explored woods behind their houses. Their families went camping in national parks. They hiked, traveled, backpacked across the world. I, on the other hand, had never roamed a forest. My love of nature came from books, television, and movies, not through personal sensory encounters. But in graduate school, and especially as an aspiring experimental biologist, I became convinced that a love of nature was a critical qualification. It seemed obvious. My insecurities grew, insecurities translated into inadequacies. Did I belong in science? A fortuitous encounter with women's studies changed my life. It was this very department that introduced me to feminist science studies, Professor Gino Barr in particular, to recognize how central assumptions of gender, race, caste, nation, and urban-rural divides are in graduate school, and how they intimately knit into professional expectations and identities. It transformed a narrative in Rebecca Herzig's wonderful coinage, suffering from science, into a narrative of empowerment. Feminist studies saved me, gave me the tools to recapture my love of biology. It seems fitting here, almost 2 decades later, to be here to present work from a new project on decolonizing botany, a project that brings together my Duke roots in biology and feminist studies. In this new work, I'm exploring new genealogies to depart from the debates of the old two cultures, where a story of the humanities and the sciences, once separated, are brought together anew and whole through feminist science and technology studies. So much of science and technology studies remains grounded in internal histories of the West and the biosciences. What is lost are forgotten genealogies, the erasure of women of color feminists, indigenous feminists, and post-colonial diasporic, crip, and queer feminists, who have always written more syncretic, symbiotic stories that do not privilege the human. I use queer here as method that seeks to make strange. To think, read, or act queerly is to think across boundaries, destabilize the normative, to celebrate, in Angie Willie's words, queer feminist desires for new modes of conceptualization and new forms of belonging. In bringing feminism and botany together, I trace how colonial roots of botany shape the foundational language, terminology, and theories of modern botany. Botany remains grounded in the violence of its colonial past. Decolonizing botany is a project of how feminist and biological thought can together lay a roadmap for more just planetary futures. In reconstructing history of botany, feminism, and the planet, many feminist theorists inspire, and I highlight 7 of them today. Jamaica Kincaid, who you already heard from, Chela Sandoval, Toni Morrison, Sylvia Wynter, Suniti Nam Joshi, Eve Tuck, and Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, to show how a planetary reckoning necessitates critical feminist thinking and methodologies of care. Chela Sandoval's influential work on methodology methodology of the oppressed offers an overarching metaphor of what feminist theory can offer botany. I recast this as a methodology for the pressed, since pressed plants and herbarium sheets ground much of botany. Its dense entanglements with colonialism and classification, the site of the herbarium exemplifies the botanical imagination. While the dead remnants of a plant on a herbarium sheet is an apt metaphor for epistemologies of empire, the herbarium is an impoverished site to tell the story of life on Earth. Sandoval's work allows us to develop a political methodological landscape for questions of difference. Her work of differential consciousness offers a robust method for feminist interdisciplinarity, where disciplinary consciousness operates like a clutch of an automobile, the mechanism that permits the drive to select, engage, and disengage gears in a system for the transmission of power. As you will see, any process of decolonization must engage, disengage, and re-engage the clutch multiple times as knowledges from many disciplines and interdisciplines uproot and reroute botanical wisdom. By mobilizing love as a critical site of inquiry, Sandoval opens up new possibilities of alliances, consciousness, and politics. Toni Morrison develops an evocative concept in Beloved, rememory, a term she uses as both a verb and a noun, a haunting memorial of what has been excluded, excised, evicted. Rememory, as Vivian Salehana argues, Rememory, as Vivian Salehana argues, is preserved in institutions branded upon their violently structured bureaucracy and practiced upon the bodies of the colonizers by the bodies of the colonizers. In her Black feminist hauntology, the figure of the ghost neither confirms nor denies the metaphysical. The past is not merely the past, but a place to make deeper discoveries, as satisfying as they are disturbing, reaffirming our shared humanity. In Morrison, ghosts do not return, they are imminent to space. Remembering opens up the past, lessons of care that violent legacies of colonialism and slavery have erased, invisibilized. It opens up registers of memory, echoes what Christina Sharp calls wake work, a way of reflecting that avails us particular ways of re-seeing, re-inhabiting, and reimagining the world. Remembering opens up that past, textures of lost memories in the flesh, in the sinew, in the pores of the living and the dead, the ghostly afterlives of Malthus, Darwin, and Linnaeus, in restored tales of life on Earth. Act 1, Botanical Amnesia. Invasion biology emerged as a new field in the 1980s, and it has exploded since. By definition, invasive species must be foreign. We have seen a resurgence of xenophobic alarm from the political right and the left, from environmentalists and non-environmentalists alike, a veritable well-funded industry of bioinvasion, an academic, policy-oriented, and activist field. The idea of invasion biology is predicated on a binary view of the world, in place and out of place. Deeply racialized, invasion biology stokes xenophobic alarm of a world increasingly out of place. Cultural theorists argue that this recent hyperbole about alien species is best understood as a cultural panic about changing economic, racial, and gender norms in the nation. The perceived globalization of markets continue to be interpreted by elements of the right and the left as a problem of immigration. Thus, immigrants and foreigners, products of the global, are perceived as one of the key reasons for problems in the local. Here, Sylvia Wynter is clarifying. In her genealogical exploration of Western thought, she identifies two key representational figures. Man one, or Homo religiosus, emerging from a theological order of knowledge of a pre-Renaissance Latin Christian medieval Europe, a figure that opens up man two, a bourgeois figure of liberal monohumanism from the late 19th century that she calls Homo economicus. Wynter crystallizes the key figures of colonialism and how academic disciplines were shaped by the logics of empire. Race in her conception is central to Western humanism, a foundational anti-Blackness we can trace to 1492. The project of colonialism was the proliferation and naturalization of Homo economicus. Remembering invasion biology through the histories of empire and Homo economicus reveals a profound and deliberate botanical amnesia. Empire was an extractive economy. Where colonists went, plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and viruses went along. Indeed, there are no natures and cultures, only nature cultures. Imperialism is a fundamentally ecological project. In the early modern period, botany was big science and big business, critical to Europe's ambition as a colonial trader. Colonialism ushered a massive and grand reshuffling of global biota, Columbus's biological bedlam. It would be accurate to characterize colonial expansion as the original bioinvasion. One can and should understand the installing of the biological sciences as the universal abstract and expert knowledge as a significant legacy in the afterlives of empire. Thinking contemporary invasion biology alongside colonial botany reveals stark colonial racial logics. During colonial rule, there was a laissez-faire attitude and unlimited mobility across borders. For example, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the USDA had an active program where they sent biologists across the world as explorers to find anything new and interesting. So, for example, Dr. David Fairchild himself, between 1898 and 1928, introduced over 110,000 species into the United States. Similarly, the American Acclimatization Society, where someone said, why don't we introduce all the bird species mentioned in Shakespeare into New York Central Park in the 1980s? And so they did. Such was an open policy, and this was the norm until the late 19th century. As Alfred Crosby argues, the roots of European domination of the Western world lie in their creating new Europes wherever they went. Settler colonists ravaged native populations of human, plants, and animals. Where Europeans went, their agriculture and animals went. They thrived while indigenous systems collapsed. Capitalist logics fueled mass export of resources out of the colonies to growing ravages of the environment through unchecked industrialization, and then logics of development in newly independent post-colonial nations. Homo economicus is at the heart of an extractive empire. It reveals structures that consolidate memory, creating ghosts that continue to haunt. Colonial nations enacted strict racial border policies to exclude everything foreign. Plant and animal quarantine laws developed alongside national human exclusion acts, the first one about 1 year away from each other. An ultimate act of irony, after centuries of global expansion and ecological decimation, those very colonial nations now insist on preserving the new Europes from newer immigrants from Asia, South America, and Africa. Indeed, in the poignant case of settler colonialism, a national rewriting reimagines the white settlers as the new natives and all others as foreign and undesirable. Remembering allows us to understand that the native of invasion biology is not the native of indigenous studies. I re-narrate this abbreviated history to highlight both the hubris of empire and its subsequent amnesia that together prevent us from a true botanical reckoning with our colonial past. Invasion biology is entirely a natural cultural project of colonial nostalgia and return. A botanical reckoning is a profound recognition that frameworks of nature, in and out of place, are political constructions, fossilizing particular evolutionary ecological movements as true native nature for posterity. But the biota of the world have their own agency, propelling their own evolutionary futures. Biological nostalgia is fundamentally an unecological project. We do not and cannot control the world, even if we wish to. A true biological reckoning would acknowledge that we are all migrants, dispossessed or dislocated, albeit in very unequal and hierarchical worlds. Botany needs new nature cultural imaginations to reckon with the amnesia that consumes it. We cannot be ahistorical and ground our lives in an originary politics of white purity, litmus tests of plant origins, landscape restorations to a mythic past. Indeed, we conserve and save native germplasm, seeds, and plants with greater zeal than recognizing native land, native people, native cultures, and native worlds. A decolonial botany must confront histories of land, of violence and conquest to overthrow a racialized and reductionist botany. Act 2. If race and nation emerge front and center in the case of biogeography, sexuality emerges as a critical node in reproductive biology. The innovation of sexual reproduction is most often posited as an evolutionary adaptation for the production of variation, the selective terrain and playground for natural selection. Thinking nature culturally means understanding not only how human sexual biology is indebted to frameworks of the natural, but also of how scientific knowledge was founded on the twinned binaries of sexual difference and racial difference. Londa Schiebinger opens her Nature's Body with hermaphroditic plants castrated by unnatural mothers, trees and shrubs clothed in wedding gowns, flowers spread as nuptial beds for a verdant groom and his cherished bride. Are these the memoirs of an 18th century Academy of Science or tales from the boudoir? And the answer is both. As Schiebinger reveals, these are categories Carl Linnaeus used for a scientific classification that was both abstract and universal. Linnaeus gave primacy to plant sexuality, and his scientization of botany coincided with an ardent sexualization of plants. She argues that the scientific revolution and the revolution in sexuality and gender came together to elevate plant sexuality as a central focus of botany. In his nomenclature, Linnaeus does not use stamen and pistils, but introduces andria and gynea, which are derived from the Greek for husband and wife. Thus, the classes of plants end in andria and orders in gynea. Note, class male is ranked higher than order female. Linnaeus saw plants as having sex in the fullest sense of the term. Plant sexuality took place almost exclusively within the bonds of marriage. His renowned key to the sexual system is founded on the nuptiae plantarum, or the marriage of plants. Linnaeus scandalized the world. One critic called his word lewd, another pornographic. His work further inhibited women from participating in botany. Linnaeus also classified humans to fortify the precision of race by ordering the world's 5 races into categorical structures. The colonial legacy of botany is immense and deep. Colonial expansion permeated the globe. Western systems of nomenclature supplanted local knowledges. Colonial legacies have dismantled and erased a plethora of languages, meaning-making practices, and nomenclatures to usurp multiple cultures of knowing and replace them with the universal scientific monoculture of knowledge. Mary Louise Pratt argues that Linnaean classification ushered in a larger planetary consciousness that shaped European colonialism and exported a natural order which was shaped by Christian morality under the guise of science. Enlightenment thinkers put Christian ideas about natural and unnatural sex on a scientific footing. Social reformers in Turk invoked this scientific nature to reorder and reorganize gender, sexuality, and the family across colonial states. Thus, Eurocentric sexual mores, binary sex and sexuality, continue to ground plant biology today. A quick look at plant reproductive biology easily demonstrates the impoverished frameworks of the European household. Plants display a breathtaking array of reproductive adaptations. I began counting and I gave up. So here are some of the key terms. Plants are categorized by sex of the organisms, a most dubious and unstable concept, but such that it is. If a species has male and female plants, they exhibit dioecy, or 2 houses. They're monoecious if they have 1 house. Amongst monoecious plants, if they have 2 different flowers, they're called male and female. If only 1 flower, hermaphrodites. Over 85% of plant species are hermaphroditic, yet sex and gender remain obsessively overdetermined categories. But of course, hermaphroditic plants do not all act the same. So we need new terminology. Dichogamy attempts to accommodate organisms that either exhibit protandry, where pollen function precedes, or protogyny, where ovule function precedes. We have male parts and female parts. For Linnaeus, these were elaborate and literal analogies of convergence between human and plant. Filaments of stamens were the vas deferens, anthers the testes, pollen was the seminal fluid. In females, stigma was the vulva, style the vagina, the pollen tube, the fallopian tube. These terms endure from when Linnaeus, who created them as a version of human sexuality, a fundamentally Eurocentric patriarchal settler vision. But in plants, it is never so simple, or humans for that matter. There are more exceptions than rules. A brief ride. An androdioecious plant has only male flowers, gynoecious only female flowers, androdioecious having male flowers on some plants, bisexual ones on another, gynodioecious, androgynomonoecious, andromonoecious, gynomonoecious, polygamodioecious, polygamomonoecious, subdioecious, subgynoecious, trimonoecious, trioecious. I will stop here, but I think you get the picture. The proliferation of terms is to accommodate a world of seemingly infinite and imaginative plant variation into the limited vocabulary of European sex lives. Why reduce plants to European sexuality? Sexuality is not the body or an act. It is an ideology of Western colonialism. In learning to unread the sexual and racial genealogies that we have inherited, new possibilities to reread sexuality emerges for plants and humans alike. Here, the imaginative, inventive, and irrepressible multi-species worlds of Suniti Namjoshi inspire me. In my favorite, Conversations with Cow, Namjoshi reimagines the myth of the Indian sacred cow, Kamadhenu, into a zany tale of utterly miscegenated cultural hybridity. In the main plot, Bhadravati, a Brahmin lesbian, Scotch-loving cow, strikes up a friendship with the narrator, Suniti, who is imagined as an average middle-of-the-road lesbian separatist who teaches English in Canada. Bhadravati is not a pious cow. She shapeshifts into multiple roles and genders. Suniti grows uncomfortable with Bhadravati's porous politics. Are we being false to our true selves, she asks. Badi argues, identity is fluid. Haven't you heard of transmigration? Suniti considers various possibilities: bisexual snail, poodle, sheep, goldfish. Namjoshi's work crystallizes a central challenge of multi-species work, a politics of difference. As Namjoshi notes, I don't want to be separated from the birds and the beasts, nor do I want to humanize them particularly. Namjoshi opens up the vast and fertile terrain of imagination between the poles of, on the one hand, human exceptionalism, and on the other, anthropomorphism. As Sushmita Chatterjee brilliantly argues, Namjoshi pushes us to see the shared histories, biological, social, and epistemological, between human and the non-human. How might we take the promiscuous sexuality of plants, their breathtaking variation, to reimagine sexuality? How might we deracialize and deorientalize the sensuality of orchids while orientalizing Western sexuality? Reproductive biology showcases the astonishing sensory, temporal, spatial, and elemental innovations of plants, the sensuality of pollen and seeds in the gentle flows of the wind, the warm embrace of water, the soft furs and ruffles that transport seeds for thousands of miles across national boundaries, or the alimentary canals of critters that gently digest seeds into viability. Plants challenge the tired old language of empire to inspire plant-centric worlds, the undisciplined, exuberant possibilities of queer, the already exploding array of omni, uni, trans, pan, ambi, poly, co, intersexes, and genders. What is sex really? Biological sex and sexuality are overdetermined categories. The familiar vocabulary of male and female as universal, natural, biological, and essential is a fabrication. It is not an empirical observation, but a definition. In general, the individual that produces the relatively smaller gamete is universally called the male, and the larger, the female. This differential gamete size, or anisogamy, is at the center of compulsory heterosexuality. As Anne Foster Sterling argues, the evolution of anisogamy took on an adaptionist story of a primeval conflict of the sexes, blossoming into fantastical stories of Martian men and Venetian women, coy females and promiscuous males. But queer ecology reminds us that plant biology is not about reproductivity alone, about making babies, but also porous boundaries between sexual and social intercourse, opening up spaces of attraction, pleasure, desire, play in more than reproductive worlds. The non-human world implores us with language that blurs the boundaries between the reductive logics of neo-Darwinian sex and sexuality to think anew, plant and human alike. In queering our tales of life on Earth, we must, as Eve Tuck insists, move away from damage-centered research. Research that obsessively documents pain and loss, a pathologizing approach in which oppression singularly defines a community. How do we, as Tuck suggests, move to a desire-based framework where we don't fetishize damage and degeneration, but celebrate survival and regeneration? Eve Tuck reminds us that in the colonial roots of botany, other histories lurk. A critical reason why botany remains a worthy site of feminist inquiry for me are its entangled histories. Colonial botany appropriated local knowledges, including the work of subalterns, indigenous healers, cultivators. The colonized also resisted, and in some cases survived, saved, and nurtured local languages. These complex entangled stories open up botany from a politics of nostalgia of invasion biology to a politics of Michelle Murphy's alter life, or Bella Casa's alter biopolitics, Anna Singh's Matsutake worlds, Max Librion's pollution as colonialism, or Spivak's planetarity, a relational ethic that reconfigures the collective into not human, but more than human worlds. An ecological reckoning needs new methodologies of care and imaginations for our rural lives. Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, in her Matters of Care, draws on Donna Haraway's theories of situated knowledge to outline 3 concrete moves. First, she argues we need to think with care by acknowledging the interactional and relationality in our nature cultural world. 2, we need to dissent with by opening up models of care, especially ones that take on conflict, difference, and incommensurability. And finally, thinking for warns us of the risk of fetishization and appropriation in any attempts to act on behalf of others, human or non-humans. She shows how Homo economicus produced modern green consumerism, founded on a privatized model of care alongside an individualized biopolitical morality. Together, these theorists challenge us to imagine and theorize anew, to recognize that academic disciplines and subdisciplines developed and consolidated through colonialism have produced structures of coloniality, nomenclatures, taxonomies, epistemologies, ontologies, methodologies, and methods sanctified by Enlightenment logics. No surprise that the original colonial bioinvention is followed by a science of invasion biology, that Linnaean marriage of plants produced modern reproductive biology and nomenclature. To decolonize botany, we must respect the unceded land we stand on. We need to imagine what Robin Kimmerer insists, more than ecological restoration, the restoration of relationships between plants and people. In Ghost Stories for Darwin, I confronted the figure of the abject ghost of scientific reason and racism. Rather than repel with horror or silence the ghost, I engaged with the ghost to understand a long history repressed. Having confronted these colonial, eugenic, racist, and misogynist history, I can now see past the fading specters of Darwin, Linnaeus, and Malthus. I see other ghosts, enchanted ghosts, the lively ghosts of a vibrant and vital botanical past. The task before us is a renewed imagination, a remembering the paths not taken, the many futures that were once possible. To be sure, there is no purity, no Eden to return to, but exuberant, enchanted, teeming landscapes of radical botany, queer botanical worlds teeming with anticipation and promise. Let us liberate them. Thank you.